You've been told the story 100 times. A hobbit, a mountain of fire, one small act of courage that ends the darkest reign Middle-earth ever knew. That's the ending everyone remembers. It's clean, it's satisfying, it fits on a poster. But it's not the truth. Long before Frodo ever left the Shire, nearly 3,000 years before that ring found its way into his pocket, Middle-earth almost died. Not in a battle you've heard of, not in a story anyone tells around the campfire. Whole kingdoms disappeared in a matter of months. Cities that had stood for ages were wiped off the map before anyone could even organize a retreat. And the side we now call good didn't win because they were stronger or braver or wiser. They won because they got lucky, at the last possible heartbeat, by a margin so small it still doesn't feel real. And if that moment had gone even slightly differently, there is no ring to throw into a volcano, because there's no one left standing to resist wearing it.
Here's a question that should bother you more than it does. If Sauron was already defeated once, broken, humiliated, stripped of everything, how does a being like that ever come back? We like our villains simple. Rise, fight, fall, credits roll. One war, one ending. But Sauron was never a single storm. He was a pattern, a disease that keeps returning the moment the world stops watching for symptoms. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The version of Sauron that nearly burned the world down during the War of the Ring wasn't his most dangerous form. His most dangerous moment came earlier, right after his first defeat. In the silence after the war, when the people who should have remembered the warning signs had already started to forget them. This is where things get darker.
To understand what really happened, you have to go back to a part of the timeline almost nobody talks about, the Second Age. If the War of the Ring is the final act of a very long tragedy, the Second Age is the act everyone skips, the slow build, the quiet setup, and it's exactly where the real damage was done. After the First Great War, the one that finally brought down Sauron's master, Morgoth, the world was left gutted, burned coastlines, broken kingdoms, grief that hadn't even begun to heal. And Sauron, his most devoted servant, didn't vanish with him. He didn't slink off into exile either. He did something far worse. He came back smiling. He walked among the elves and the new kingdoms of men, not as a monster wearing chains, but as a stranger offering peace, graceful, softly spoken, patient in a way that made people lower their guard. Picture a disgraced expert reinventing himself as a trusted advisor, someone offering knowledge, comfort, and order to a civilization too exhausted to ask hard questions. And the elves, ancient, brilliant, powerful beyond most mortal comprehension, still let him in. That single decision is the crack the entire tragedy pours through.
Here's the part almost nobody stops to think about. The mechanism quietly running underneath this entire era. Power in Middle-earth was never just seized. It was handed out, deliberately, like bait. Sauron didn't break the elves with an army. He broke them with a gift. Working beside the master craftsman of a kingdom called Eregion, he helped forge rings of power. Rings built to preserve beauty, to hold back decay, to protect everything the elves feared losing to time. It felt generous. It felt like friendship. Except somewhere far away, in a forge no one else could reach, Sauron made one more ring in secret. A ring built to bind every other ring to his will. Picture handing out master keys to people you trust completely. Except one of those keys was quietly cut to open every lock you've ever given away, including the ones you haven't made yet. The moment Sauron slid that ring onto his finger, every single ring bearer felt it, a presence sliding into their minds like a hand closing around a throat. In that one instant, the truth landed. The gift had been a leash all along. They ripped the rings from their fingers. The link shattered. But what came next wasn't a skirmish. It wasn't a war in any conventional sense. It was an attempt to erase an entire people from existence.
Sauron didn't slink away after being exposed. He didn't need to hide anymore. He turned his army straight toward Eregion, the kingdom that had helped forge the rings in the first place, and he wasn't interested in defeating it.
He wanted it gone. Eregion fell. Its people were slaughtered in the streets. Its greatest craftsman was captured alive and tortured again and again for the location of the remaining rings, a cruelty so brutal that even the old texts seemed to flinch when describing it. And Sauron didn't stop there. He moved across the land like floodwater with nothing left to hold it back. One kingdom folded into the next. The surviving elves were pushed further and further into corners of the map, cut off, starving, watching their world collapse in real time. This wasn't heroism. This wasn't a story of clever last stands. This was closer to an extermination in progress, and no one was coming to stop it. At the height of it, Sauron didn't just threaten the western lands of Middle-earth. He ruled them. The only reason this story didn't end right there, the only reason a hobbit named Frodo would even exist to matter later, is because a fleet of ships from a nearly forgotten island kingdom appeared on the horizon at the last conceivable second. Reinforcements from Numenor hit the shore, and the tide that had seemed unstoppable finally broke. It wasn't brilliant strategy that saved Middle-earth that day. It was timing, nothing more.
And here's the detail that should really sit with you. Sauron wasn't stopped because the Free Peoples were stronger, or smarter, or more united than him. He was stopped because a fleet of ships arrived before the last stronghold fell. Move that arrival back by a few weeks, not years, weeks, and there was no elven civilization left to warn anyone, centuries later, about a plain gold ring turning up in a hobbit's pocket. No Elrond, no Galadriel holding a hidden refuge together through sheer will. No memory passed down through generations to explain why that ring could never be trusted. The story everyone knows, the War of the Ring, only exists because of a war almost nobody remembers. A war that was won by a margin so thin it barely deserves to be called a victory. That's the truth sitting underneath this entire era of history. Middle-earth was never saved because good is naturally stronger than evil. It survived by the width of a blade's edge, over and over, and someone, much later, decided to call that destiny.
Once you see it this way, you can't unsee it, because this was never really a story about elves and rings. It's a story about how power is never actually destroyed, it's only postponed. Sauron didn't need to win his first war outright. All he needed was for the survivors to forget the one lesson that mattered, that a gift with no visible cost is never really free. He came back wearing a kinder face, offering order to a people too tired from grief to question it, and it nearly worked completely. Not because anyone was foolish, but because power always learns to disguise itself as generosity the moment force stops working. That's the real horror hiding inside this forgotten war. It isn't that Sauron nearly conquered the world by force. It's that he almost did it by being helpful first. Every civilization in this story, the elves, the men, even us watching from thousands of years away, faces the exact same quiet temptation, the belief that if something feels good enough, it doesn't need to be questioned. The rings of power were never chains, at least not at first. They were comfort, they were convenience, they were someone saying, "Let me carry some of that weight for you." And that, every single time.
So next time someone tells you Middle-earth was saved by courage, by fellowship, by the stubborn heart of one small hobbit, remember none of that was even possible without a war fought and barely survived long before any of those characters were born. A war where an entire people were nearly wiped out for trusting the wrong kind of kindness. A war that didn't end in triumph, it ended in relief. The kind of relief that only comes after you realize just how close the ending actually was. Middle-earth wasn't saved by fate. It was saved by a coincidence wearing fate's clothing. And if you sit with that thought long enough, it should unsettle you more than any volcano ever could.
But here's the detail almost nobody talks about. The craftsman captured after Eregion fell, the one tortured for the location of the remaining rings of power, he didn't break completely. He didn't give up all of them. Some were never found. not by Sauron, not by anyone. And in the next video, we're going to trace where those missing rings actually went and why the answer might still matter, right now, in the world Frodo eventually left behind.